call the Governance and Priorities Committee meeting of Monday, October 22nd, 2018. It's the Westminster order. This time we'll take a silent moment of personal reflection. At this time, I would like to remind all members of council are obligated to declare a conflict of interest or pecuniary interest as per section 133 of the Westminster Charter regarding any item on this agenda. Again, I'd also like to remind members that this meeting is for discussion and information gathering only. All decisions will occur during council meetings. We thank all of our presenters for their time. This time, I'll go to item number 2 and look for direction from the committee on the agenda. Councilor Buckingham.
With the agenda dated October 22nd, 2018 be approved.
Seconder, Councilor Thorson. Any questions or comments? Not seeing any. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moving on to item number 3, approval of the minutes. We're looking for your recommendation on the approval of last minutes. Councilor Monroe.
That the Governance and Priority Committee meetings dated September 17, 2018 be approved.
Seconder, Councilor Dietschel. Any further discussion or comments? Not seeing any, I'll call for the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Yeah, I just want to take a moment of council's time and make note that Marilyn is back sitting next to us. And that's because Don has chosen to take Dorothy as his executive assistant. So congratulate Dorothy. Well, congratulate Dorothy.
That's how you shifting the chair.
Feel the love, eh?
Yeah. Thanks, Doug.
Welcome back. So moving on to the agenda, item number 4 is public presentations. I'm aware of any public presentations coming forward. So moving on to administration presentations, I'll let the city manager.
Good afternoon, Your Worship Council. To present 5.1 wastewater treatment facility project delivery collaboration space. So I'll ask Terry Burke to come forward.
Good afternoon, Terry.
Afternoon, Council. In front of you is, for the subject matter, wastewater treatment facility integrated project delivery collaboration room, or space. Topic is to obviously discuss the space. Earlier this year, Council approved or adopted use of integrated project delivery as the preferred project delivery method for the wastewater treatment facility. As part of that process, a big room is required for the collaborative process of the detailed design. And this is a collaborative process of multiple team members and quite large. This room needs to be large enough to accommodate all those team members, and it could be up to 30 people in reality. We looked at a multitude of options. We identified 2 within this report, but there could be the use of our training room is another additional one. But we felt allocating the training room to commit to this type of an endeavor over a multi-year time frame would put our administration at risk of providing that space for our training opportunities for our staff. Specific requirements based on the preliminary review with our consultants and our IT specialists. There's some key things that would need to be in this big room. Internet speed of 200 megabytes. This isn't due in reality to the collaborative or the interactive 3D model that will come out of this building. And this needs to be shared to all of the companies involved, including the consultants and the contractors. Each has a responsibility in maintaining this 3D model, and as such, we'll have a very large data transfer back and forth because of that. Of course, tables and chairs, partitions to break off into specific areas of topics. So throughout a day, there could be 3 to 4 topics being discussed by all those team members, and they're charged to bring forward solutions for those pieces, all at the same time. Of course, to be able to facilitate some of those discussions and everything else, some TVs that project some information onto it, looking at a smart board to be part of that collaborative space as well. And lastly, switches and routers dealing with the actual internet and the network connectivity that is being proposed. In addition, as being the undeveloped space upstairs in the operations center, there's some key mechanical type infrastructure that is needed. The key one there would be the ventilation. There is no ventilation in that area whatsoever, other than some radiant heater along the outsides. Lighting is very limited as well, and those two things need to be upgraded to be able to accommodate the use. Of course, the network connectivity, that just goes hand in hand with all the IT side of things. So based on discussions with our building maintenance team, we put a price tag of, come up with an estimate of about $78,000 and change to facilitate those mechanical type upgrades needed in that space. In regards to estimates on the IT side of things, they come out to about just $43,000 and change in addition to that too. The one thing on there I talk about is the current internet fees would need to be increased to another $375 per month to accommodate that $100 or $100 megabyte extra capacity internet. I had a chat with our IT department, and we currently are spending about $1,000 a month for internet side of things. So it's a little bit of an increase, but there's options that are out there. At this point in time, these are the costs that we know. I just want to talk a little more about the IT-related equipment before we go to the next topic. Most, if not all, that equipment will be reused after this space in any shape or form at other facilities, whether it be the operations center, be it the wastewater treatment facility. One way or another, that equipment will be utilized going forward. Television, like the televisions, for example, the smart board, it can be integrated in the new facility. And if it's integrated in the new facility, it can be potentially grant fundable as long as it has that capability. The mechanical side of things, what we're proposing on that is we have a 90% design already completed for that open space already in anticipation for future offices and all meeting spaces and whatever else. And we're following those recommendations as best as we can, so it's not throwaway as well, to keep those costs down for the future. Sorry. In addition to the open space in the upstairs of the operations center, we inquired out to the real estate community to see what the costs were associated with renting space in the community. And indications were they were about $13 per square foot per month. And based on the space needed to accommodate 30 people, it was about a 2,000 square foot area. So when you get into those costs, it became quite large to actually do that rental space and then look more into what we have currently in place within the city. On the budget side of things, in the 2018 capital budget, we do have $9 million associated with this project, and we're looking to utilize the city's portion, and if not, some of the grant fundable portions for this work that is being talked about in this information report. I'll open up for any questions from there.
Thank you, Terry. Questions, comments from council?
Thank you, Worship. I gotta say I was surprised to read this. Very wrong. I would have assumed this would have been something I would have known about, or we would have known about sooner than later when we talked about the delivery model of this project. And like I say, read it wrong. interesting enough, looking at 135,345 for an expense on this project, when you figure just about $14,000 in additional internet fees, plus the actual space, or just under $1 million in rental over a 3-year period. So that's what we're anticipating here, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So $20 or $13 a square foot, you're looking at $936,000 in rental. But was this always there?
The big room itself?
Within this model we were going to use, was this always going to be a requirement? And if so, where did I miss it?
Yes, it's always an important part of the IPD process, is that collaborative type of approach. So there's always going to be a need for a room for that aspect of things. And I was pretty confident that we explained that in the past, but if we missed something in the confusion, I apologize on that one. But definitely the IPD process, an integrated collaborative approach. So there is a need to get together and actually talk through all those pieces. And making decisions on every facet of that building and the functionality of it. And as I talked about breaking out into those groups are defined to what are these pumps, and then figuring out what those pumps are, or what is this piece is, and start bringing it together. And then as a group, they are looking at that ramifications of those decisions that are being made.
That's your question, President? Okay, Councilor Thorson.
Thank you, Your Worship. In terms of it seems to me relatively straightforward between the two options. The one seems like way too high of a cost to pay to do it, and at the end of the day, the city is going to need to develop that area at some point. So part of me is under the belief, understanding that okay, that extra space that we're going to have to add mechanical to, well, that's going to happen at some point down the road. This is just moving that process up to a much closer time. So I can definitely, understand that. The price, to me, I couldn't tell you whether it's high or not. I just don't know enough about it. And then on the IT side, I imagine that number is pretty good. There's even some things that I'm not sure whether they're included or not that could boost this up. Like I do this for a living. I know that drafting machines cost about $4,000. They're doing 3D modeling, so $3,000 to $4,000 for a machine. Not to mention you need dual screens, or you need the fancy big screens if you're going to actually be able to look at all the detail on screen. If you need to get an additional plotter, that's another $18,000. If you need to get cubicles run about $7,000 per unit. All these things that could be popped up in there, which I understand, it just could be a cost of doing business. My big question is though, if we are a integrated project delivery team, how much of a share on the project delivery do our partners have? I understand that we're all sharing in the revenues and trying to keep costs low, but is there not some portion of the share of these costs that belong to the partners in the deal? And if they are included, that'd be good to know. And if they're not included, would it make sense that they do share a portion of the cost? If you were to go to a consultant in town, most of them would not require, well, a lot of them would not require you to have your own space to meet in. They would have their space to meet in, or you would go to some other place. I'm just curious how this works in that model, because yes, we have a consultant that's coming from Edmonton and ISL, I believe that's our partner, so they don't have an office in town. Do we get penalized because they don't have an office, or do they share in some ownership because they're partners in the project?
Yeah, good questions. I'll try to follow what you've got here. On the price, yeah, I may not have explained all the pieces in this information report. There is computer associated with that within these costs as well. So we've tried to tackle a good portion of what we anticipate this room to be used for, and we're not talking about buying a computer for everybody in that room. There's going to be the expectation of them to bring forward their equipment in that sharing type of atmosphere. I do believe there would be a potential for a main computer that is the main hub for that model that I talked about. In regards to laying out the room, we have, in discussion with the buildings team, we do have some partitions available to be used. So we're going to use a lot of our existing and top up where needed. So there's still some, there will be some new stuff, don't get me wrong, but we're going to try to use what we have. We have some down in the basement here, we have some in the operations center, and reuse some of those key components in helping fit out this room. Share the cost, there's a possibility there. And once we get into procuring and actually going forward with the project as part of the IPD agreement, those costs can be brought back into that team and then work through that part of it too. So, again, that's part of some of the logistics. Once we actually get that IPD contract signed and sealed, and then we go from there. I think that we had a deadline we want to try to look at too.
Executive Manager Stain?
Yeah, just to add to that, excuse me, thank you, Your Worship. We did look at having this big room in Edmonton with our consultant's office. That would mean we would have multiple staff spending significant amount of time in Edmonton, potentially 2 to 4 days a week for several months until the IDP design is at least zeroed into something that's constructible. And as in any large project like this, there's always a requirement for office for construction, and we feel that this room will satisfy both those needs in the short term. So we did look at this in multiple different aspects, and we feel this is the best way to move forward. And like Terry said, if there's opportunity for us to recoup some of this cost as we get into the IDP contract discussions with potentially the first 3 owners of that contract, which would be the city, the owner, ISL, and a consultant, prime contractor consultant. We can definitely look at that. I don't have enough experience to know to be able to give you a yes, we can recoup 1/3 or half this cost back. We looked at how to best deliver with the least amount of throwaway cost, and this is the option we came up with.
Sir.
Yeah, thank you. At the end of the day, I understand if we're not there yet. That's totally fine. It's just more the principle, the matter of, and maybe in the grand scheme of things, when we're talking about $80 million, it's going to come out in the wash, and you're not going to really notice whether we covered $30,000 worth of office expenses or whatever the case is. So we've got to keep the big picture in mind, but as far as the space goes and the cost side, just from first glance at it, without having the detailed breakdown, which I don't really need, I think it's in the ballpark. So, and that to me is better than the alternative of renting space at $13 per square foot. So, thank you.
Your Worship, just one more point of clarity. We're bringing it forward now so that we're ready to go once we get grant funding. There is a significant amount of work to do, I guess, to get that room ready, in particular the HVAC component. So we feel that's going to take some time to get a contract out, get it procured, get the work done. And we want to be able to hit the floor running once we get funding approval. If we wait until we get that funding approved, we enter into that contract, we're delaying that essentially another 3 to 4 months before we can actually get going on the project. So part of this is to get ahead of the curve and be ready once funding is available. So.
Councilor Pledger.
Thank you, Your Worship. I get it, this is a new process, and I think we're learning as we go along, and I think it's important to keep that in mind. The only piece for me, I guess, it's a question mark, is that we see that a portion of the $9 million approved can be used. So I guess the other question in my mind is that we set a budget aside for the stuff that won't be. Have we created it yet, or do you need council to approve it, or where's this money coming from?
Well, ideally, we've allocated in our budget $9 million, which is in regards to our Alberta Builds Canada Fund. So we've got 3 coming from the province, 3 from the federal, and 3 our own money. So a portion of it that can be grant fundable will come from those other parties.
Yeah.
But once we make the proper paperwork, everybody else, with the other part coming out of our share. So yeah, now I'm thinking about, like, from the estimates that I'm seeing, maybe about 25% of the costs would be potential for grant funding, but the rest of it will be our take of that pie.
And so where are those funds allocated? So pardon my ignorance, I'm sorry, but, so do we have a budget set up right now, currently for that?
Yes.
Okay.
So the $3 million we have in the budget, so there's $9 million that was approved in the 2018 capital budget. 3 million of that 9 is city contribution.
Perfect.
And
all-
that's where
all
this
I-
funding is going to come out of, that 3 million that we're putting into the pot.
Yep. So there's still space if there are other unanticipated pieces we go along as well. So I just want to make sure that I understood where that money's coming from. And thank you.
We're not asking for new money.
Perfect.
Councilor David.
Thank you, Worship. The war room or the big room, you need one of those on a job like this. There's no question. It makes totally good sense to put the improvements into our building. You're going to recover a lot of those improvements after you're done anyway, whether it be the heating or air conditioning or ceiling grid or whatever you're going to do. But I think the big gain, in my mind, is the benefit of having your high-end professional group that are designing this building. When they're in the design stage, they can talk to each other when they're doing it. They're not somewhere else and you're waiting 2 days to talk to them, and you can get on with the job. And if you run into a problem, they're right there to solve it. And I think that that'll more than, you may not be able to count it at the end of the day, but it'll be a bigger value than the renovations themselves. No question in my mind. I've seen some of this stuff on a smaller scale, and there's problems, let alone a massive project like this. So the Energy Center at the Lakeland College would be a good example to follow because of all the technical stuff that has to go on there. So good job, well done. Thanks.
There's one other piece that I would just want to make sure the council's aware of too. Like, we're not proposing to do all those build-outs within the second floor, just what needs to be accommodating this team and this approach. So at some point in the future, there will be another request once we need that space for our offices and our new staff.
As you've indicated, there is a process to this, and this is a new road for ourselves to go down, both city administration as well as council. I think that is important that we keep that in mind, and I want to reassure the taxpayers again, who knows that it is the GPC meeting, no decisions were being made, but when this project was laid out, we're seeking 75.9 million in matching funding with the city, knowing that somewhere down the line there's going to be monies that they're going to expend that will not be able to be recaptured against this project in due time. It's just the nature of the beast. Governments lay out criteria. Our staff have gone through this numerous times. I've lost track of how many applications we've made to the government to try and access money. Every time they come up with a program, they'll be back in there. But we know there's going to be dollars and cents that the city will fund that are not matchable. It's just that simple and straightforward. So appreciate administration bringing forward an option where we can utilize the existing city structure, namely the second floor over at the operations center. I know people have asked me what goes on there, and this as well, not a whole lot, but now we can certainly have that, and it's going to be tied up for a good 2 years, so it'll be good use of that space, not to have to fork out additional monies in a commercial venture, because we'll be talking about that, I'm sure, in due time. But space is always a premium within the city from our own needs, and this is one where we can fulfill those needs. So, I certainly appreciate that work done on the administration's part to look at that option, but to give us the option that if we chose to go outside, we have that option. But, cost savings, tremendous. So, a good use of a project that some years ago was built by a previous council, and we'll see that it continues to get used for where it's intended. Any other comments? Questions? Thank you very much, Terry.
Thank you.
Moving on to 5.2, the city manager.
Thank you, Worship. To discuss 5.2, train whistle cessation, I'll ask Brendan Schott from engineering to come forward.
Welcome, Brendan.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Your Worship, Council. In front of you, you've got an information report on train whistle cessation within city corporate limits. Topic is to understand the requirements to eliminate train whistle activations at public grade crossings within the city. Currently, CN and CP Rail are required by the Canadian Rail operating rules to sound an audible warning as they approach each and every public grade crossing. There is a process that we have to go through in order to get the rail authorities to cease whistling at our grade crossings. And that's outlined here in these 8 steps. First of all, the municipality has to express interest for whistle cessation. Then the municipality needs to consult with the railway companies. This is to let them know of our intentions and what the process moving forward will have to be, how many crossings we're looking to cease whistling at, and so on and so forth. We have to issue notifications and public notice of its intentions, notify the public of what we're planning to do. We need to get together with the railway authorities and assess all the safety requirements at each of the crossings, assess what's there in place right now versus what the standards are, the minimum standards are for ceasing whistle cessation at that grade crossing. We need to agree that all the requirements have been met for each crossing in question. All the upgrades have been completed and up to snuff, I guess, for lack of a better term. The municipality passes a resolution to prohibit train whistling at each specified railway crossing. And the railway will notify Transport Canada that specific for all grade crossings within the city, there will no longer be any train whistles at those crossings. And then the final step is more just the maintenance and operation side of things, and the municipality and the railway share the responsibility for maintaining that crossing as normal, just with the added safety measures that were put in place. Transport Canada's got grade crossing regulations and standards to dictate the minimum safety measures that must be in place prior to ceasing train whistling. A summary of how the railway crossings in the city compared to the requirements are shown in the following table. In the table here, it's shown that there are 7 crossings that need upgrades. I guess it's first good to mention here that a lot of the information in this table is directly from the rail authorities. In November 2017, it was mandated that we share information at each of the public grade crossings. We give our information to the rail authorities. Rail authorities give us their information on all the parameters of the grade crossing. This is a lot of this, or all of this information is taken from that report. Table 1 shows there are 7 grade crossings that require upgrades to be able to cease whistling at those crossings. However, we do have the option of, instead of including all the grade crossings in this train whistle cessation request, we can just request that certain ones be included in the whistle cessation. Some of these options here could include, if they're on 52nd Street, a lot of the crossings there service private properties, and it's not a thoroughfare for, say, CN or CP area, where trains could be coming through at any time of the day. Usually for servicing private locations, you're only usually within normal business hours, which I don't know if that's something that we bring forward to council. We could exclude those from our train whistle cessation request, and there would be a cost savings or a reduction in cost anyway on ceasing the whistles at our main crossings here. The one that I guess would be a little bit more up in the air versus for servicing private versus a normal public grade crossing would be on 52nd Avenue, where it is just a road that it crosses, but there are only 2 destinations beyond that point. This is north of 52nd Street on 52nd Avenue, which services Husky and PWMCO, and typical operations will still only happen during regular business hours on that crossing as well. Some budget and financial implications. Basically, the upgrades or the addition of the safety requirements at each of the grade crossings would cost roughly from $350,000 to $400,000 each. So if we included all 7 crossings should be in the realm of $2.5 million to upgrade all of our crossings to meet the minimum standard, the minimum safety requirements. Or if we only include 2 of those upgrades, being on 40th Avenue, be around the $750,000 range. This includes a fencing requirement. If there's going to be no whistles at these crossings, we have to make sure that our pedestrians, if they're crossing not at a roadway where we provide sidewalks or trails, that they be, I guess, funneled towards our crossings and cross in a safe manner, having the bells and the whistles at that grade crossing instead of allowing them to cross at any point between crossing and 0.4 kilometer and 400 meters beyond that crossing. Attached is the map showing where all the locations are that meet minimum standards and the additional standards that CN actually imposes. CN requires that flashing lights, bells, and locking the gate is required at every grade crossing where what whistle cessation is to happen. And I think we have 7 of them, sorry, that meet those standards today. So is any questions on that?
Councilor Whitney.
Thank you, Worship. Thanks for the presentation. As we try and continue to provide good governance to the city, I just kind of wanted to ask where this came from. I hear a lot of problems and a lot of issues get brought to my attention over the course of any given week. This has never been one of them. If we're going to talk about spending $750,000 to $2.5 million on whistle cessation, I just wondered how much of a background we have for issues with this type of thing. I love them at midnight as much as the next guy, but just curious why it's coming to us today.
Thank you for the question. We had some inquiries through some elected officials asking about the process and how this all works, and so we a few of them, so we thought we'd share it with all of council in the public format so people would be able to understand the process, because it is a complicated and costly one in some cases, so that's the reason behind it.
Councilor Baker.
Your Worship, I certainly understand people complaining about whistles sometimes in the night, but the costs are going to be high. You go to south of Edmond there to Leduc and see what goes on there. It's fenced right through the whole city. I don't know just how much we have to do or how we fence it, because I even took a little drive to try and see if I could visualize. There's a jump wall down south, we could have one here maybe, you never know. But what worries me is the liability. I find it hard to believe that CN and CP would absolve themselves and say, we have no liability. It's all falls on the city if something serious happens. And I don't know if that's really addressed in here. And I think that's the biggest issue right there. So, thank you.
I don't know if the administration can address that. I'm not sure what the liability is. Executive Manager Stan.
Yeah, my understanding, Councillor, is that what we put forward is what CN and CP require in order for them not to blow their whistle. So as far as liability or anything else, I think we want to seek legal opinion on that. But our understanding is if the city was to request, there is a process, request whistle cessation, there is a process that Brendan had alluded to, and that there are minimum requirements or the requirements that those crossings would need to meet, which we've identified, and the cost associated with those requirements. Outside of that, I think we would need to seek legal advice on liability of, you know, they're setting the minimum standards, what liability would be on the city. I can't answer that.
Just a follow-up question for you. Typically what happens in civil license lawsuits, they have a tendency to go after the people with the deep pockets. And the railroads have deep pockets, probably. I don't know that, but probably. And we have shallow pockets, comparatively speaking. I just think it's so important before we even consider anything like this, that be really clearly flushed out and we know exactly where we stand before we even consider moving somewhere like this. But this is good information, and but that's my worry. Thank you.
Councillor Thorson.
Thank you, Your Worship. So in terms of the upgrades required and the ones you may have a cessation on or not, you said it's possible to ask for a cessation on some of them and not others. I wonder if just the northeast corner of the city is relatively less populated because there's so much industrial around that area. What would be the cost, I guess, if you were to allow whistles at those two and the ones where it's going during the day, they go to Husky and PWM Steel, and all the other ones ask for a cessation one? I realize it's not exactly fair, but I'm just curious what our costs look like in that scenario. Because you're dealing with the majority of your problem, at least you have one whistle rather than several whistles through the night. I don't know if it completely solves the problem. I just wonder what the cost requirements would be in that scenario. It doesn't deal with it completely, but it gets us part of the way there without having to spend $750,000.
To answer your question there, the only crossing that doesn't directly serve one private access is on 52nd Avenue north of 52nd Street. All other crossings serve specifically private property where those operations would happen during normal business hours, and there would be very few rail movements per day. Right now, all of the crossings would be eligible for us to request whistle cessation. The only cost that I can foresee, I should say all of them, all except for number 1 and number 2 on 40th Avenue. So just downtown would be where we'd be eligible for that. The only requirement that I know of that we would have to be putting in place is on either side of the crossing, we would have to have 400 meters worth of fencing that forces a pedestrian to be funneled towards that rail grade crossing, say on 48th, 49th, or 50th Avenue, downtown specifically.
Okay. So then that's really, if you were to do as I suggested there, which is still have whistles at 1 and 2, and you could ask for a cessation on all the other ones, you would still have a cost related to fencing on all those other crossings that are included there to ensure that people are being funneled to use the proper spot where the lights and bells are going off.
That's correct.
Okay. Thanks.
Councillor Baker. Sorry. Looking at Councillor Fang.
Yes, I was one of those that brought this forward, and I did have many complaints on it, and so I thought I would just check and see what it would actually cost in order to do something. We had no idea what it would cost, so that's really the whole main game here, is to see where we stand and to take a look at the different options that we've got. There is also, from what I understand, Transport Canada has a rail safety improvement program that will pay up to $550,000 for rail improvement. And there's many communities that have taken advantage of that. So did you get a chance at all to look at that, Brendan? Was there anything in the paperwork?
I would have to look into that, being that this is specifically for whistle cessation. I'm not sure if there's any specific requirements or any fine print in those requests. If it's just a public upgrade for safety, I think that I don't know if they would treat that differently than this, but that's something that we can definitely look into.
Yeah, take a look at it, because it does. There are communities that have taken advantage of that with the cessation. So that might be something that might make it a little bit more palatable. But that was the whole idea, just to see where we stand.
Right.
And I think, that when you take a look at statistics, with the vehicles nowadays, you've got people with, they can't hear the horns anyway. So that's a real argument. Is it worthwhile? Or, is it really a safety feature when you've got lights flashing and bells ringing? And does a whistle really have an effect? So I guess that's all part and parcel.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Fletcher.
Thanks, Roger. Again, good report. So roughly 350,000 off, or 300 change in the various for each of those. Part of me, I guess as I was listening to this, is that I want the horn or whistle to not go at night versus I need the whistle to not blow at night. And I think we're you know, there's a want and there's a need, and I think if we can access public safety dollars to do this, I would say absolutely, because I perceive it as a want. That railway's been there a long time, and people have built where they've built, and for us to look at our budgets and say we're going to carve $1.5 million out of some of the other projects that we have going, to do this instead, I think is not likely.
Yeah.
At least it wouldn't have us.
Councilor.
Yeah, they covered pretty much what I wanted to say.
So I'd like to chime in as well. I think the question I'd like to send back to administration, thank you for the report. It's good to know that we're most of the way there if we were to proceed with this. The two questions, the cost per fencing to actually just move where we're at with the blue proposed dots, if we were to examine that, to come back to council with just the information on what a rough estimate to be reasonable. And I guess the other question I have would be to ask administration. I know in the last 10, 12 years, we've put arms in, our arms have been installed, I believe, on 62nd and I believe 75th. And again, has that been the railway's initiative or was that the city's initiative? And just from that perspective, because as Councilor Franklin mentioned, I believe there is likely some more money available in rail safety that seems to be an issue at the federal level. This is what's unique, is we've discussed it. This is not a matter that the provincial government even touches, because the railroads are governed under federal acts, and they've got it's the federal government, the railroads, and the municipality. Just like when we talk about overpasses and underpasses around the rail, we don't even talk about it until the province really. They wash their hands of it. But from the perspective of 1 and 2, I'm surprised those haven't been upgraded compared to 75th and 62nd. I'm just kind of curious how that order developed, and is there any money available? So it's kind of a multitude of questions there, because both of those do get a lot of truck traffic going on that side of the city. And if there's a possibility to get in line with the federal government and the railroad, both TN and CP, to see those signals, even though CN takes the bulk of the traffic, I believe, in the city today. One train or 2 trains a day when CP comes in, it does tie up the road. So I'd like to send that back to administration for a little more detail around that and see if there's a possibility. I agree with Councillor Diachuk from the perspective that if we did 750,000, I think we'd be hard pressed with this council to try and go looking for that in a budget that I expect to see soon. But in the same token, is it more feasible? And all we're down to is some fencing. All of a sudden, the cost-benefit ratio improves dramatically for me. So I'll leave it send back to administration for a few more details. Would be greatly appreciated. Just to fill in those blanks, and then we know for sure. Because I think we've got a hard number, and I don't even want to guesstimate. So we'll wait until that number comes back and bring it back to give us some more information. Because I think, as Councillor Fagnan mentioned, it was requested of some citizens. I often get asked, how do we make the whistles go away? They say you can shut down the train, but that won't do as much good in this community, because agriculture and the oil and gas industry depend on this train every day. So, yeah, a little more information would be terrific. Thank you. Any other questions before we go there? Thanks very much. Great research and great map. Thank you. That very detailed. Appreciate that. Moving on to agenda item 5.3. This is Nazareth.
Thank you, Worship. To discuss ATCO franchise agreements, I'll ask CFO Denise McDonald to present.
Good afternoon, Your Worship, Council.
Good afternoon, CFO.
Before you is the ATCO gas and the ATCO electric franchise fees for 2019. In May of 2018, they renewed the current franchise agreements and to make them more current, and with that, the council has the opportunity to annually adjust the franchise rates. So there's a process in order to go through to change those rates, and that includes a resolution of council, public notice, giving residents the opportunity of 45 days to object, and then prior to December 1st, the municipality would send a letter to ATCO in order to change those rates for 2019. Currently, the ATCO gas franchise fee is set at 25% and the electric fee is set at 11%. Basically, the franchise agreement gives the franchisee the opportunity for a monopoly on the service, and that gives them exclusive rights for utility services, construction, operating, and maintaining that system. In return, the franchise fee compensates the municipalities for direct costs, restrictions on planning and development due to utility right-of-way, as well as inherent risks related to utility access. Any adjustments to the franchise fee will impact the budget. Increasing the franchise fee by 1% will result in approximately $92,516 to the gas franchise fee and $298,961 to the electric. So council has before them the opportunity to direct council to remain status quo, to direct council administration to put forward a request for decision to the October 29th regular council meeting to adjust the rates or bring back more information.
Questions, Councilor Fletcher?
Thanks very much. Do we have a record of, or do you have the information relative to what the rates have been for the past 5 years, or have we been pretty much just same for franchise fees?
What I do have is an average of similar municipalities.
Okay.
So I have the closest to us, I have Airdrie, Spruce Grove, and Leduc, and Okotoks. So Airdrie for gas is 29.6, Spruce Grove is 10.7, Leduc is 27, Okotoks is 5.25. The electric side of things, Airdrie was 13, Spruce Grove is 20, Leduc is 16, and Okotoks is 10. So we added in a number of other municipalities, as well as our neighboring municipalities, and the average for gas is at 15.6, and electric is 8. Does that help?
That helps. But I don't remember us voting on changing it last year at all. I think it was a status quo. When do we adjust it annually?
It is to be adjusted annually. Council has the opportunity to adjust it annually.
Okay.
Whether it's been adjusted, I can't answer that question.
Executive, my understanding recalls that 2 years ago, the electric side went from 10 to 11, and the 25 has been in, for gas has been in for a number of years, at least 5 plus. So we can get exact number.
That's good. Yeah, I'm loath to recommend adding more burden already than we placed on our community, and if we can stick with what we got, I think it would be probably acceptable.
Councilor Craig?
Yeah, and I tend to agree with that as well. That's where we can keep it status quo. I think that's great.
Absolutely. That's great.
Your Worship, there is a good comparison on the website. You can see what everybody in province is doing, and we should stay right where we're at, for sure.
Any other comments? Councilor Corson?
Thank you, Your Worship. The only comment I would have is just to have, for when this actually comes to council, just to make sure we have that listing that you said kind of in front of us, just to see. And even if you email it out, that's great, but even for the public to see, that we're in the same ballpark, the other ones, I think that's important information. One of the first ones you said was Airdrie?
Airdrie.
And that's on the electric side, you have 29%?
Gas was 29.
And what was the electric?
Electric was 13.
Okay. This is related to a different topic, but it's just something that came to my mind. But I believe in a report I saw recently, they were the lowest property taxes in Alberta. So this is another example of different ways that taxes are collected and paid in a way where you can play with different numbers. So that's all. It's very hard to compare apples to apples when there's so many different facets of revenue in and revenue out in different communities. But I think I've got all the information at least I need today. Thank you.
I agree, Councillor. I think that the challenge is that there's many different ways that the taxpayer is affected, and this is one of the ways that you put it all into a broad perspective. I agree that as the comments, certainly revenue is important to the city, but so is the taxpayer, because that's where the revenue comes from. Council makers often remind me of that on a regular basis in this council. So I think that by all means, leaving status quo is where we should be at, and appreciate the opportunity that it comes forward to council. It's something council and the public need to be aware of, because the residents see it, the businesses see it on their bill, and they need to understand it, because I'm sure ADCO is very quick to explain where the money goes when they phone ADCO. So it's important that we understand it as well, so we can help address it in the community if there is issues. And appreciate having the opportunity to see those comparisons up close. I've had a chance to see the whole list, and when you see some are at the max and some are at the lowest, and that's just, we're somewhere in between. I appreciate that. That's what we try to be. Is we don't want to be the least, we don't want to be the very bottom of the pile, but somewhere in that middle if we can. Try and ensure that our community is looked after as best as we can, but at the same time, we do have to pay our share. Thank you very much. So I appreciate it. Moving on to agenda item number 5.4, to City Manager.
Thank you, Worship. To present school site allocation and disposal agreement, I'll ask Sam from our planning department to come forward.
Good afternoon, Sam.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Now, the purpose of actually coming here today is to close the loop on an agreement that's been, we've been going through the preparation process since, I would say, it started back in 2012, and but there has been a lot of back and forth between the school divisions and the planning, that the city school planning committee. And at the last meeting, that was in December of 2016, the school planning committee requested that we distribute the agreement back, or the draft agreement back to the school board to take a look at it one last time and get back to us. So we had been coordinating that for quite a number of days, and now it's already at least for signing. That's part of the reason we're here now. Just to give you a little bit of context on this agreement, I will just want to go through the agreement again. I know this presentation was almost similar presentation was made in 2016. That was when council was just starting, and I know a lot of those information kind of get lost because. So I want to just go over it again. Now, the school site allocation and disposal agreement is intended to replace the current Lloydminster Municipal School Reserve Agreement of 1983. Now, there's a lot of things wrong with that agreement. Now, the Planning Act that it references actually is the Planning Act of 1980. Now, we are now in the era of the Modernized Municipal Government Act, which actually has been going on since 2000. The purpose of the old or the current agreement was to coordinate land requirements for education purposes for school boards based on allocation of reserve lands. And the way we used to do it is we have a developer has a land, we take 10% from that developer, and then out of those 10% based on enrollment, both public school and Catholic school division, if it's 30% Catholic school and 70% public school, then we distribute those lands along those lines. This is not very efficient, but the last information I had from staff is that I think there's an accumulation of credit by the public school division up to maybe 60 acres of land now that the city will need to give back to them. What we're trying to do is to have something that's a lot more related to not only just enrollment, but again to the demographics and a number of other factors. So that's the purpose of this agreement. So the terms of reference for the
Sam,
yes,
I just want to clarify, because I think you're saying they're the public system. Either the systems have acreages that we'll have to give to them.
Yes.
I just want to be, because I think there's some clarification. There is no automatic right to get the 60 acres or whatever's in there. They will only get the property when there's a site, school to be built on a particular site.
You're correct, yes.
Okay, so just that, the way you said it sounds like
Oh,
somehow we owe them 60 acres or whatever, so just to be clear, you only get the land when you build a school.
Now, what we have is a spreadsheet. That spreadsheet actually just says, okay, well, based on where each of these school divisions are, this is the kind of credit they have right there, but they still have to prove it. And that proving means that they have to at least apply to the province have to approve that one, and then they provide all that information. Thanks for that correction.
I just wanted to make sure.
Okay, yeah. Now, the update agreement, that's part of the terms of reference that was given at this, in the preparation of this agreement was, the agreement was to be updated to reflect current legislation. Now we have the 2017 MGA, devised more practical site allocation framework, proposed clear school site allocation and disposal terms, and then the agreement should encompass both Alberta and Saskatchewan legislation. The current one we have now actually deals only with the Alberta legislation component of it. Then in the agreement should continue to provide school sites based on need. Then communicate with school boards to identify potential school sites and in the early planning stages. And I think this was actually done between 2012 and 2015. And I know Councilor Diachok, I see your name in the minutes every time I look at you, so I know it's you were on that committee.
That was a quiet.
Now, to communicate with the public on potential school sites, provide opportunity to have joint use agreements, and one of the other things is to simplify, update the site allocation and acquisition process, and then include a policy statement that we can now insert in the MDP, because the current MDP reference what we already do have, what we have on the ground now, and then that's going to be referenced in the new site allocation agreement. So the content of the agreement itself just speaks to the purpose of the agreement, the principles. I'm just going to go through this one high level, and I'm not going to drill down on it. Then City School Planning Committee, that's the composition of this, the committee, who can be there and what their responsibilities will be. Then surplus land allocation and disposal provisions. Then dispute resolution, which is one of the major component of that, and then an application which was included as Schedule A. Next one. So the principles, I just went through some of these principles. One, school sites have to be based on proven need. Regular dialogue is effectively coordinated. City shall provide updates on growth and development. School boards shall provide enrollment statistics. City shall engage with school boards on planning for new communities. Provide communication and make decisions in a timely manner. Then it has to be in the spirit of collaboration. Joint use sites are optional. It's not, that means joint use sites are not going to be mandated by the city. A school division may acquire land directly from a third party. That means if there are no lands and we don't have any MRs left, they can actually go ahead and acquire land on their own. Then the roles of the committee, this one includes providing direction and recommendations are required. Then recommending amendments, at least to the agreement. Then review all statutory plans and amendments based on the agreement. And then review subdivision application, because all of these 10% are taken from subdivision. At the point of subdivision is when the MRs and the MSRs are taken. Then review facility plans, identify joint use sites, review surplus land inventory, produce and present an annual report to the parties, and review and provide recommendation to school site allocation applications. That's all of those review will be carried out by the school, that's the school planning committee. Now, the allocation application, just a few points of what's contained in the application. Well, any application will contain a proposal, then the conceptual site plan, that's what the site is going to look like, the alignment of that plan with statutory plan, and especially the municipal development plan. The MDP is the one that dictates where anything goes within at least at that high level. Then there has to be, this is something we don't have now, a justification report that includes one, demographic, environmental, evaluation of the site, and then transportation and connectivity. That means the location has to be at a point where it can be easily accessible by vehicles, especially when we're transporting either kids or young ones to school back and forth. Then joint use considerations too can be a part of it if applicable. That's what, more or less in a nutshell, what that agreement entails. Now, for today, though, what we are looking for is one, two. I'm still trying to look at my note here. Well, what we want, today what we're asking for is just to provide that information to the committee and generally try to close the loop to the extent that we need to sign this agreement. It's been an agreement that's been going on for a number of years. We've had our lawyers review it, and we've had all the school divisions review it, and they are all pleased, and they're pleased with what they have right now. Now that we have an agreement, then we want to move it on to sign it, so that, well, if the committee can give us direction regards to maybe we need to prepare a narrative for council meeting to maybe at which point council will make a decision, or the committee or the council now then will make a decision with regards to when to sign the agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Questions, comments?
Your Worship, just one comment. I think when we still at the Public School Division, we meant to allocate some property or designate a school site for what later became College Park School. And when I met along with the board chair and the folks in the city, again, it's clear, and I think this is a bit of a departure from what I think was done in the past. But clearly, the city has the authority to designate where the school will be developed.
Yes.
And in this agreement, it suggests that you're giving up part of that authority in that decision-making process. And in the process, when we met with the city, what we heard was that you may have an opinion about where you want to put your schools, because you may see that you're perhaps underserving a particular area of the city or not, and that would be a place you would like to build your school. And so, you know, we were, in our serving our own self-interest, that was definitely part of our planning. What we were informed by the city, however, and I think, and probably it could be strengthened in here, is that the city has ultimately the plans for the development of the entire city, not the school divisions. And so I guess as I look at this, as the city looks at the development plan overall, the development plan should really be taken into account where the development is going to go, rather than just serving the needs of one particular division. Or if they perceive that, geez, I want a school over there because we're underrepresented, or, you know, that, geez, that's a new area, I want to go there. So that part for me was missing in this document, and I think that's in part why the city should be the final arbiter in terms of saying, look, here's the plan, and as much as you want to go here, the city's developing in the opposite direction. And I was schooled for about 45 minutes on that by the prior mayor and a developer within this community. He said, you're looking in this direction, you need to start looking in this other direction, because that's how development is unfolding. So what I don't see in here is that one of those principles that you shared in there was, you know, the development plan of the city playing a role in the site selection for the city. So when you listed your principles in the brief on the slide, it was about the second and third last slide. In my mind, I think really the city really needs to be, and I know that certainly you have you don't have the bulk of the votes at the meeting either, I don't think.
Now,
so for me, that's a challenge, because I really believe that authority rests here. We're the people that deal with the developers and where the development is going.
Actually, the current agreement actually empowers the city a lot more than, this new agreement, the draft agreement, gives the city a lot more authority over where things are located. And that's why in the agreement, the focus is more on the municipal development plan. Within the plan itself, in terms of, and again, there are two levels of statutory documents. One is the MDP, the other one is the area structure plan, which actually reinforces the need, because that's where lands may be kind of identified at this for this type of future development. Again, in the proving of need, each of the school divisions will now have to prove where they need to be, but that has to be within the overall plan of the city with regards to location. They can, and I think something that's a little bit defective now is that school divisions can make a determination where they want, at least where they want the school to be. But what this one is trying to correct is actually that one.
Yeah, the only flaw in that, I guess, Sam, is that when schools present their case, what they can do is they can take their numbers and reroute and redivide school attendance areas. And so there can be disruption to the overall plan and distribution of students in there. And that's probably diving too deep into detail. But I guess, you know, before the schools actually come to you for a request for the land, they have to demonstrate proof to the province, because the province won't move until they reach, each of them have different percentages of capacities, and it's higher in Saskatchewan because they have different filters than in Alberta. And I think, you know, that therein lies the approval of the school has to occur first at that level before it comes, the ask comes to the city. And so, yes, you know, there's a joint proposal going forward. They're ranked in about the top 3, so I would anticipate if we grow even marginally in the next couple of years, we'll be seeing another school being built in the city. But the piece for me that I see in here is that the city somehow has to ensure that it's less about the approval of the school, because that's done by the province and not us. The justification needs to be around the factors where the site should be located. And that's where I think our role, our plans and master plan for the city need to trump that piece.
And if you look at the application, that's the central allocation application itself, the focus is mainly on some of the things you were kind of reiterating. That's
yeah, I read through it quickly, and I was just trying to see. For me, when they got down to the number of people on the committee, the membership, is the city have the majority of the votes? So you have 2 administrators and 2 trustees from each division. So that's 8, total of 8, and then you have 3 administrators and 2 from the city. So you have 5 from the city. We don't have the majority vote.
Well, that would be on the membership composition of that. I think
that's my point, is that I still believe the city should have to be the final arbiter around that decision.
And I know this actually maybe at least we kind of stresses it has to be collaborative, but again, to the essence of that is it has to be based on the city's vision as maybe espoused by city council generally. And that means it has to be at least based on the MDP, that's the municipal development plan.
But then, and I think that tweak would be under those points, and maybe you shared the large bullets on there, but I would, you know, the city master plan, if that would be included in some major report, that would, anyways, I don't want to dominate the discussion.
I've got Councillor Monroe. No, okay, and Councillor Baker did.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Dr. Sam. This brings the whole light back to what's happening in our city, like many cities. When you talk about the city having jurisdiction, there's a good reason for that. Because how are you going to plan your city? And this brings to light the need for border protection around our city. It leads to the master plan and the development plan. If we don't have a land, how can you do a master plan? And it's tough to plan without having jurisdiction. So consequently what happens, the school board or school boards, one of them, may decide they need a school. And it's tough to tell them where they can put it when you don't know where you're going. And that's the need to annex and get the annexation solved around the city. Because I wouldn't want to be the planner sitting there saying, well, I don't know, I'm not sure which way we're going to be able to go. So it must be very difficult. The clause dealing with the recreational land has me somewhat confused. It makes reference to the park and recreational land around the school. Is that part of the school site?
Well, we can...
I can't tell you the page number now. There's 50 of them. But there's a reference to that in this agreement, and that the city would be responsible for maintaining it. This is my first go at this, so...
No, public reserve, municipal reserve, MRs, generally maintained by the city. That is, once a developer comes in, and I know so it's once a developer comes in, develop a plot of land, and then we take the 10% MR from them. If that, after that's FCCs, and that gets turned over to the city, then the city now starts maintaining those ones. That becomes a responsibility. But when we are talking about school reserve, that the responsibility of that one becomes that of the school, because that's there once, at least one, unless there's a joint use agreement on it. If there's no joint use agreement, then generally it's going to be maintained by the school reserve, any playground they have. But most municipal reserves, especially any areas where we have playgrounds and trails that are generally taken as part of the 10% that we took away from any developer in any community or in any neighborhood, those ones are usually maintained by the city.
And you're under.
I was going to add that, so if you look at College Park School, the developer has some property on the southeast end. So actually worked with the school division to incorporate the trail and the property and space around it. So I can't tell you off the top of my head if they said, here's the line where you stop cutting the grass. I think actually the school division just probably cut the grass all the way up to the trails and beyond. So, but there's property there that extends certainly beyond, you know, the property that is deeded.
There's an agreement there.
There's an agreement, yes, sir.
Yeah. So, reading through this once, like really trying to read through it thoroughly, what are the real changes from the Saskatchewan Act to the Alberta Municipal Government Act? The real change in your mind, because I know I need a lot more time to get this figured out, to try and get it straight in my mind, what is going on. But is there, I know you've got it highlighted from certain things in here, but is there much of a difference between the Saskatchewan and Alberta School or Disposition Act, or whatever you call it?
One of the challenges in Saskatchewan is that when the school is going to be built, the property has to be purchased by the Saskatchewan government through the Department of Education. And so one of the challenges in Saskatchewan, for instance, is they have developers that want to go to Silver City, outside of the city, they put a development in and they tell the province you need to build a school here because we're going to have 20,000 people. And the province nods its head and has to find the money to build the school. So it's a process that's really directed and controlled primarily by developers and not the province. The challenge for them is that they create new developments. People will leave downtown Regina and Saskatoon, and now they have empty schools that are left in downtown areas. And then the question becomes that who gets the money when it's sold, because initially the taxpayer paid for it. And so the argument isn't about the property. School divisions still retain the right to dispose of.
This is a good system.
Yeah, but in Alberta, the biggest challenge as well is that the systems developers don't get to drive the bus on school developments. But the bigger issue is that more and more of these schools are aging out in Alberta. And so what's happening is Alberta has a much more aggressive building program. And then cities are going, well, hold on a second, that's public property, you're selling it, the school divisions are putting money aside. And so putting in developments, and so they butt heads around that part of the Governance Act, if you like. So you see in there, it's pretty clear that the schools have the right to dispose of the land and retain the resources.
There's a point that's really important here that I believe, when you're in Saskatchewan, for example, the Jack Campus site, it's built right on the main street, 47 and 36. All that frontage is picked up by the city taxpayer. You know, all that streets and roads are, nobody paying taxes on those two blocks. And with the city having management overview, you could plan those schools so they're inside and you build around them so that the development around them pays for the main sewer and water lines around them. That's one thing I think I picked up here. But the one thing I didn't get in my head was understanding the park system, but you'll teach me, won't you, Sam?
And Ken, I was going to say, Jack Kent is a one-off because the Lloyd Public School Division actually purchased that property. It wasn't, the property given by the city through the land credit system, and it was purchased by the school division at the time. Because they were anticipating putting a school there, so rather than waiting for the land credit and the province from across, they purchased the land in advance and said, yes, now we have it, and we'll build it when we get the approval for the site.
I'm not saying you get it wrong.
No, I was just saying that that's, it's a one-off because it wasn't the land credit scheme, so.
So that's why it's important to get this sorted out. Okay, thanks for the time.
Councilor Torson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just had one question around one of the definitions. Approving authority is one of them in there. So is the city council considered the approving authority for developments, or is that a different body of one of the other governments? It says approving authority means the subdivision approving authority with respect to an application for subdivision of land within the city pursuant to the MGA or the Planning and Development Act. I just wasn't sure if we are the approving authority.
Well, the designated, that's been delegated by council to the city manager. So the approving authority for all subdivision in the city now is through the city manager, and that's been delegated down to planning and development. So generally, when we reference that, we're actually just talking about the normal application process in which the city goes through the application and takes all the MR dedication, that's the municipal reserve dedication, out of whatever it is the developer is trying to do the subdivision they're trying to kind of approve.
Okay, because I think this sort of answered Councillor Diachek's question on 5.4. It says the school site allocation application process shall be administered by the city with the final decision at the sole discretion of the approving authority, and in event of special appeal it goes through the list, and the city is one of the people who can have that sole discretion. So regardless of votes, I think that we still carry the hammer, let's say, as far as having a final say, because we are the subdivision appealing body, or the subdivision approving body.
The only challenge with that is that once the school has been approved by the ministry, you're expected to literally be able to hit the ground running around these pieces. And I think that the challenge becomes, if we don't approve it, you might jeopardize the allocation and construction of that site. So politically, we're put in a seat where, do you want to not have the school built and you're dragging your feet? I think ultimately, my biggest concern reading through this is that City Council is responsible for representing and acting on behalf of the interests of all people in the city. And each of those organizations represent a portion. And there's an assumption made that they will act in good faith all the time. And that's a great place to start, and I don't disagree with it, but I think we have a different level of responsibility that we need to maintain doing our business as council.
Oh, sorry. No, one thing about, because, thank you very much, Councillor Torson, on that. One of the things we tried to, through this process, actually we went back and forth, especially on this little discretion of the approving authority to determine at least where the land is going to be located. It's not going to, at least based on the review and what we've been trying to do, it's not to ensure that the city puts a lot more burden on school boards to actually prove themselves, but to ensure that at least that the control of the location where the schools are located actually becomes that of the city, not the school board, based on those three criteria. One, the demographics, and I know I did well. Having worked in the city of Messing Hat, I knew the biggest challenge that we had to deal with has to do with disposition of old school sites, and that's selling them up, because the downtown now has grown a lot older, and most of them have moved to the suburbs. So those schools now are there, they're surplus school sites. How do we deal with it? So that's why we're saying the city still has to retain authority with regards to those locations based on those three criteria. One, demographics, then accessibility. It has to be at a place where it's accessible to those who are going in, and then the environmental issues.
And I think those are important principles. I guess the parallel discussion we've had at this level has been for people who come in and request to build at a particular site. And one of the requests involved us decommissioning the access to the water and the sewer at our expense. So there were other sites recommended where the addition of one water and sewer line would obviously be a better scenario for the city in terms of expense. So I guess as we look at these sites and look at them, I guess what is the mechanism to ensure that there isn't going to be an inordinate cost for us to run the water sewer lines out to these places, provide the sewers, all the supports and services that are required, as opposed to those where there's an alternate site where it is cheaper and it is more effective for our taxpayers. That's it. So I don't know where that fits into that, but it's not demographics and it's not access.
One more question.
Yeah.
Just as far as, one of the main documents that I don't really refer to when we are talking about mentioned anywhere here is an area structure plan, because normally you look at that to see where the school reserve is within a particular neighborhood when a developer makes an application to actually make a subdivision. So is that simply implied by the municipal development plan, because the area structure plan is kind of a document that comes below the municipal development plan? Just because I didn't see any mention of area structure plans in here, and that's kind of where I go for answers.
The reason the ASP is not mentioned is that the biggest determinant of schools and where sites are going to be located is actually the MDP. When it comes to the ASP level, we already do have communities already identified in the municipal development plan where these schools are going to be. The exact location is what we try to pin down when we get to the area structure plan level.
Okay, so just to be clear, when you're looking at an area structure plan, that's another level of details, whereas the municipal development plan is more the principles and guidelines that you use to develop an area structure.
That's right.
Got it. Okay. Thanks.
Very good questions, councillors. This is a 20-page document that covers a lot of ground, and I will be doing some more of a review on it as well, but certainly appreciate the questions, because it does deal with some interesting things. And because of our uniqueness, again, word comes out that because of the MGA, this does require some updating, and it does fall into the charter, as our city clerk will certainly confirm. I'm sure that from that perspective, we have a great relationship with school board, but we want to ensure that it is cut and dried, from that there's clearness, concise, that when we do something with them and they do something with us, they know where they stand, we know where we stand. And at the end of the day, the city has been looked at for land, and I know we've had those discussions. The school board's constantly reevaluating. I know Councilor Dutch, I can do this better than anybody else at this table. The populations are growing and continue to grow in our city, and that's something that we need to make sure that we're prepared for. So thank you, Sam, for bringing this forward. I think there's some questions we'd need to pound on it a little bit more maybe before we're ready to say yes. And I know this has been a long time in coming, but thanks for bringing forward the information.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Moving on to agenda item number 5.5, the city manager.
Thank you, Your Worship. To discuss the community services bill and leases, I'll ask the city clerk, Doug Rockwell, to present.
City clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. The item I have today, for you today is community services building, and to provide the committee with information on the community services building for their review and direction. Administration has received inquiries from current lessees of the community service building regarding lease rates. The majority of the current lease rates expire on December 31st, 2018. Administration is currently conducting a high-level review on city-owned community facilities, including the community services building. The reviews are being completed to evaluate the economic and operational feasibility and move forward to cost recovery. The objective of the analysis is to identify and address any operating constraints and ensure that our capital investments are serving the community at the highest possible level. Administration is working towards having market evaluations complete and standardizing market rent rates throughout the city to maximize the earning potential of city-owned properties while remaining fair and transparent. By ensuring all city-owned properties are leased at market value or for a full cost recovery rate, we're aligning the City Council's sustainable fiscal strategy and preventing unnecessary burdens on taxpayers. The local real estate agent has completed a lease rate review and has advised the market rate is $15.96 per square feet for the community services building. And the building has historically been provided a 25% discount for market value for nonprofit organizations. However, this is non-compliant with the Lloydminster Charter. The current nonprofit lessees are paying a rate of $12.15 per square foot, with one lessee is paying a rate of $16.21 per square foot. The annual operating cost for the community services building is $107,000. The building has 7,981 square feet of leasable space, including meeting rooms. As a result, the cost to cover operating expenses for the building would be $13.40 square feet, or $13.40 square foot annually. Assumed cost for capital improvements over a 10-year period equates to $100,000 a year. The capital cost of the lease space square foot to cover over a 10-year period is $12.52 per square foot annually. To achieve the total cost recovery through the community services building, the lease rate would have to be $25.92 per square foot. The community services building is in need of major building upgrades, and this has not been factored into lease rates to date. The city's operating costs include custodial duties, utilities, snow clearing, mechanical maintenance, and general maintenance. We have attached the cost breakdown to this report. There are no capital improvements that are critical and cannot be deferred. The highest priority projects include replacing windows and parking lot rehabilitation. The objective is to provide the community with an update on the community services building. Administration intends to enter into a one-year lease agreements at the current lease rates until the facility review is complete and administration has further direction on how to proceed with the future of the building. Administration will seek a resolution from council regarding the lease rates for the facility in the near future. In accordance with the Lloydminster Charter, a resolution of council is required when lease rates are provided below market value. The options are, we're presenting this for the council to accept this information or seek more information, or send us back to seek more additional information. And the budget and financial implication is in comparison to market rate as shown that the above city is subsidizing all but one of the leaseholders in the community service building by $3.77 a square foot, or $29,609.58 per year. Back to you, Your Worship.
Thank you, City Clerk. Questions, comments? I think it's pretty straightforward. One of the items that the council has been dealing with is trying to make sure that as a taxpayer in general, we're getting cost recovery best we can. Certainly, this is something different totally from recreation and culture in our city. From that perspective, and this is showing me that we're underrated our thesis. And from that perspective, community services building, if my memory serves me correctly, the administration is 55 years old approximately. Is that, or is it even 65?
I can have a look here. I have it.
And if you wouldn't mind, that would be great. And the building's not getting any newer. From the perspective, there's been work done in the past, which I appreciate. The administration's done it. The building doesn't look that age immediately, but certainly from the perspective, I'm always concerned about what's lurking underneath in the walls and in the ceiling. Because of a flat roof building, we have to see one that does not shed water properly. Kicking anybody in the engineering department, but it's really hard to understand how we have a flat roof building on the land where we get a lot of moisture and doesn't always run off. So that's what scares me, is what's behind the walls and underneath the ceiling that we don't know underneath the basement.
Your Worship, it was constructed in 1951.
1951, okay, so that puts us, 67. Oh, 67 years. 167 years. Councilor?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, this it's good information for sure. It's kind of a tricky situation. On the one hand, you know, you've got not-for-profits that are the ones that are doing this, but on the other hand, for everyone that's not in our building to get additional funding from city taxpayers, which essentially that's what you're doing by providing a reduced rate. There's a process that's, you know, relatively transparent where people go to city council and ask for funds for particular projects and different things like that. And I just don't believe that we're following that philosophy with how this has been done in the past. I think we have to maybe rethink our approach based on the information I'm seeing as to when it's a fair ask from taxpayers, and then if anyone's requiring something different for specific projects, then we have to look at it the same way we look at other groups. I just don't, I don't like the idea of picking and choosing favorites arbitrarily or anything like that. Like, it just doesn't seem appropriate from my point of view. You know, we talked about we've got the market rate on there, 1596. It's kind of a tricky thing for city council, because I suppose just because it's not real transparent of where the funds are going and in which order, and then not to mention the recovery rate over the next, 5 years with the amount of capital upgrades that are required, you are significantly subsidizing these not-for-profits, which I understand to an extent. As a council, you do that with businesses that own their own property or that are in other facilities that get property tax exemptions through Copter and things like that. Well, that process is different than this. And when we get up to having nearly double the square footage cost, the cost recovery rate over the long term, it just it's something we really have to think about and consider whether we've got the right rate there for what we're providing. Thank you.
Councilor Tycha.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I agree, it's kind of a hidden third-party ask that never really got asked but was given. And I can understand that certainly when our economy was running as hot as it was, this is probably the last thing that was ever going to enter into the radar for anybody for that matter. And so as we look at this piece, I guess, what's fair to the taxpayer and ratepayer in the city relative to this is it fair for the ratepayer to say, yes, you need to subsidize the following businesses or not-for-profit organizations? And because it's not a public transparent ask, they haven't even had the opportunity to say yes or no to it. And it's just been done arbitrarily. The other question for me, I guess, is how long this 67-year-old building will be able to stand, and at what cost to us do we continue to invest to support and sustain it? And at some point, you need to be able to say that we can't sustain it any longer. And I mean, when you look at the location, you look at the opportunity. We're talking about a downtown area redevelopment plan. That property has a lot of potential, and quite frankly, the building is on its last legs. So I think there's a broader context within which to have these considerations. Certainly, there's no malice intended to any of the organizations, and I think they all do good work. But this isn't about that. This is about simply the fees that are being charged, the expenses to the city, and really the lifespan, if you like, of that building in terms of having us as council having to make those decisions.
Councilor Baker.
Your Worship, that building in question has a pitch roof on it now, and a new roof system, and I'm not sure exactly the date, but I guess 8 to 10 years ago. There was a new roof put on it, and an engineering study done on the building. And the one thing we haven't done and we should have done is put some windows in it. The windows were the biggest thing at that time. The building is above grade, so it isn't a water issue. It doesn't have a basement, as far as I know. It may have a sunken mechanical room, but I can't remember. I've never been in it for years. So the question is the building worth saving? Is it good for another 20 years? Probably. It's a structural building, but we'll let the proper authorities decide that. But at the time, I believe, somewhere in the city there should be engineering records of the check of that building. And my understanding was there was no wall problems. I don't know the structure of the walls. I don't know that. So if there's concern for water in the walls, I believe there wasn't then, and a new roof was put on.
Thank you for that information, Councilor. Any other questions, Councilor Thorson?
Thank you, Your Worship. Now, this is related to another subject, somewhat that we already passed. So when we were being quoted information on the IT area in the big building, it was quoted as $13 per square foot per month. These are $12 per square foot per year. Am I correct in that equation? So is this the monthly revenue from this group, these groups? So $12 times 770, which is $9,600 per year.
Right.
Which is what I thought. And then when we were talking about the other one, we were saying $13 per square foot per month, which is ridiculously high, which I think we need to get some correction on that big room philosophy before we move forward with that one, because the number did seem very, very high to me. So I'd like some clarification on that before any of your decisions are made there.
I'll check with engineering on that. I would assume that was a typo on the previous report. Typically, it's
is per year. 13, I think it would be $13 a square. And I looked at Councilor Baker because he knows this for the construction. When the rent is charged, it's usually per annum.
Yeah.
So in the case that we're charging, I think you're right. It might have been earlier on, the mathematics was a little high for the cost. It's well over 5 that space. Other than the qualifier, going back to that, I don't want to back up too much, but the costs of the developments that we're going to do on the second floor would be internal benefits, where they'd be external benefits if we were to lease and do leasing.
Sure, but on the space alone, those numbers are roughly the same if you're talking $26,000 per year versus $75,000 for 3 years, so that works out about the same. Anyway, I don't want to back up too far and give this areas enough attention. It would be good to get some of that back to us. Thank you.
I'll have engineering email it out short term.
Thank you, Executive Members. Thanks. Any other questions regarding the community services building presentation around the leases and things like that?
I guess just for clarification on the triple net, I don't know what we do about taxes on those buildings, but caretaking is included in the lease rate. Snow removal and stuff like that.
So,
which normally you pay an extra.
So as I look at that, that's the one item, there would be no taxes coming back to the city other than simply whatever we collect for rent is our total income in those buildings, correct?
That is correct.
So in essence, those, the tenants of those buildings are receiving it all. I'm not just trying to remember the right term, but it's all in rather than triple net that they would be paying.
That is correct. It's not triple net there. They pay $12.16 a square foot, which includes all janitorial, maintenance, snow removal, the whole 9 years.
So, in other words, if I can ask this question, the cost recovery rate that you would potentially see on a piece of property downtown would be, what we call cost recovery, would be rent plus triple net, basically?
Typically.
That gives us an idea.
Triple rent's pretty good right now.
Triple rent, she's pretty good there, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, for the dollars on the side. Councilor?
Yeah, and I'm just taking a look, I question that, a few of these are nonprofits. I do see that there are some nonprofits there, but certainly not all. I think the building's going to be coming to the end of its life here sooner than later. And, in the big master plan on the whole building side of things, where, what's going to happen there and what should we be doing with this property. I think its days are numbered. But they're certainly, all the tenants are getting quite a deal in that building, no question.
I think it's important. The cost of the building and operating isn't the $25.92. The $25.92, I believe, includes the capital projected over the next 10 years.
Okay, thank you.
So that's including.
So we're somewhere in between
the operating,
12, 16,
utilities, and capital.
Triple net.
The triple net isn't a true 25.92. Would be somewhere in. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Just to clarify, so you know where we're at. Okay. Any other questions? Well, thank you for that report, too quick. Moving on to the agenda. Moving on to item number 6. And 6.1, I'll let the city manager.
Thank you, Your Worship. To present 6.1 draft business expense policy, I'll ask Dan Hobson from the Legislative Services team to come forward.
Good afternoon, Dan.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and Council. I'm going to present you with the draft business expense policy for your review and feedback. This policy is meant to replace our current travel reimbursement policy, which was passed almost 2 years ago, actually. It was in December 2016 when it was passed by council. It had not, since that time, undergone any review. So this is the first review of the policy that I'm aware of that administration has conducted. When we did conduct the review, we found that overall the content of the policy was actually quite well. We just found that it lacked a lot of clarity and a clear approval process. So we've gone through the policy, cleaned it up. For the most part, they're almost the same policy. They'll look entirely different. We moved things around, cleaned up formatting, tried to clarify what certain clauses we're getting at. Some of the key changes I'd like to speak to in section 5.2, you'll see that there's a clear list of approval processes for yourselves and the city manager, which is lacking in the current policy we felt. As well, this in section 8.1 does allow for the reimbursement of full meal costs when receipts are provided. We've also updated the meal per diem amount in section 8.3, and you'll see attached to this, there's also a comparison chart of other communities and organizations that set the standards for those rates. Sorry, and what that would be, and the mileage rate stayed the same. Sorry, I want to bring that forward as well. So at this point, I'd be happy to address any questions that council and your worship may have.
Thank you, Mr. Hobson. There's one thing I've got with this one. It's the same issue as before. Actually, I'll preface it first by saying, yeah, the $17 a day that there was before was, the way it was written to me was if no receipts were provided, $17 per meal per day is the appropriate. However, if receipts are provided, the full amount with receipts is to be repaid. Is that correct? Is the way it was worded?
That's how this draft policy is worded. Our current policy restricts it to just the, I believe it's 16 per meal. Or 17 per, sorry.
I interpreted that differently. I think this is better because it does deal with that issue. However, there's still an issue to me. Your payroll folks are going to hate you if you arrange the meals in this way, because a $35 meal provides an $18 taxable benefit to the individual if they do not provide a receipt. So on every single one, they will have to figure out what is the taxable amount on the difference between $17 and $35. That's where the $17 number came from. That was the allowable per diem without a receipt. I just see this as being a challenge, unless you can argue that it's not over a $51 per day, but you may have to put that as a threshold in there, that it's not over $51 per day without receipt. Otherwise, it will be a taxable benefit, and that will make administering it very difficult for your payroll staff.
We will certainly take that back, Councillor. An interpretation I had of the CRA, and you'll know better than myself, but that $17 meals was one receiving an allowance for meals, which I guess ultimately you would say that's what this per diem breaks down to, is where it's that allowance. So that would be my misinterpretation, if that's the way we'll clear that up.
Like I said, I don't know what the right answer is, because in some scenarios, I just think that you may need the $51 per day threshold even on top of that. So if you have some other combination, it may need to work out to $51 per day if you do not have a receipt under those scenarios, so you don't run into a taxable benefit issue. And that's really the, Canada Revenue Agency, who does this, I don't know, a couple million times a year, says that that's an appropriate amount for a business meal expense when you do not have a receipt. It's just the right ballpark of what you should spend. I understand that can create challenges, but in those scenarios, if you're in a place where you can only get a $20 hamburger because that's all that they offer, well then you have your receipt and you get paid your $20, otherwise you're stuck with $17 without a receipt. That's just the way my understanding of the system working.
Councilor Winter.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. Ben, I don't know. I'll just charge you $10 a meal, then I won't have to fight the government again. But I do have one question about company vehicles. Maybe as time goes on, you get used to driving your own vehicle, and you know how it's equipped and it's winter weather, and it's four-wheel drive and there's ice on the roads. Is this a mandatory thing that you take a truck out of the pool? Because I'm not sure I'm reading this right. It says you will take a company vehicle if available. Well, I prefer to drive my own vehicle because I know the vehicle when I'm on the road, especially when it's icy.
And those were some concerns that are brought up, and the way the policy is right now is that it's encouraged to take company vehicles or fleet vehicles, as we refer to them here. The reality is that we don't have a large fleet vehicle base here, so it is very rare that there would be a fleet vehicle available for, especially for long distance overnight travel. It's just something we've had to work with.
So in some cases, I can answer that, Councillor, because I've been through this with the city manager. If there is a vehicle available and it fits the bill, we have used it, but it's not necessity to do that. It's basically, it can be used both sides. Sometimes there isn't a city vehicle available, depending on how many people are traveling. So whereas other times, people have looked to the city for a vehicle because they felt their vehicle wasn't the best vehicle.
Yeah, whichever way.
So it works both. It's a sort of a double-edged sword from the perspective, because if someone drives a commuter car and feels very comfortable, that's what they use. But if we're going to send them on to a conference down the road quite a ways, and it's in the middle of winter, they may feel more comfortable driving a vehicle that's more suitable to the city, which is available. So I think it's availability.
So it's kind of optional?
Yes, section 7.5 in the policy would state it where it's encouraged. We'd like to see that you've looked into it, but if you like your own vehicle, that's your problem.
People get used to driving their own vehicle, especially on my side. I'm just one of them. Maybe nobody else does, but I don't believe that. You know, you got to get used to the braking and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's just different. Thank you.
Councilor Thorson. Okay, Councilor Thorson.
Thank you, Your Worship. 11 point, where was it, sorry, I'm losing my spot. No, sorry, 10.6. Do members of council have to provide you proof of insurance? Just says that we're required to have a minimum of $1 million liability. I'm just curious, is there administrative directives that come with this policy?
We are working on those directives in the background right now. For yourself, for council, I believe that's an issue that would be looked at in the council remuneration policy review. But from an insurance standpoint, this is the golden standard, I guess.
Okay. And I couldn't even tell you off the top of my head how much mine is on my vehicle. That's probably standard or less. But I just wasn't have to provide proof of insurance prior to using a private vehicle to travel on behalf of the city business.
If you live in Alberta, you have 2 million already. It would be residents. Saskatchewan, where they're
Good to know.
Councilor Dutch.
Well, I'm still struggling with 8.3, I guess, and I can see scenarios where if our city manager is meeting in Calgary with other city managers and they go out for lunch with the minister and they opt to go to wherever the minister wants to go for lunch and $35 is going to cover the dinner, what's the right amount? And so if they choose to go to a place that is, let's say it ends up costing our manager $100 to, and that excludes all the things that are ineligible, are we still okay with that?
There's a clause in there that says you can on special.
Yeah, so if receipts are provided, you would be reimbursed at that meal cost. Are you saying that might not be, you'd want to limit that meal?
Yeah, and I'm raising it more than anything because I think in the past people have questioned the amount and location where people have eaten and drank and done whatever they've done. So I think making it public, at least at this point, is important so that we don't have those kinds of questions. And so that it's front and center in our discussions that we've talked about it, we know about it, and as a council, if ever, why in the world did Ken Baker eat at the, I don't know, a giant pickle and spend $110 and here's a receipt for his meal? Well, that's how much pickles are going for, and he had to meet with the ministers when he did it, all right? And so he submitted his receipts, they're all in order. And so that, I guess, $110 in the scheme of our whole budget is not a big deal, but it can be a big deal to some taxpayers who look at it, they may say, well, that's overspending. So that's all. I think we just need to make sure this is out of you.
If I may, just to add to, I understand your point, Councilor, sorry, that senior management expenses are posted to the website, so there might be a bit of relaxation there.
It's charming.
And also that if a member is taking out other parties on the receipts, this policy would require them to include who they are taking out for dinner or who was at that dinner. So that's a added layer of transparency that wasn't in the current policy.
Okay. And if I could, just one follow-up. So we conducted a forensic audit. Are there any pieces in here that have flown out of that forensic audit here that we operate in a different way than we did prior?
So the note I just mentioned for section 8.2, I believe it is, where the names of the meals, I'd say that's a significant point, as well as the definition of receipts. We've very much clarified that it is to be the itemized and not just the credit card slip or anything like that.
Great, thank you.
The city manager may have more. That's all I have.
I'll go back to Councilor Thorson, unless you want to comment.
I was just going to mention on Councilor Diachuk's question regarding taking other people on. I think the other thing that's important is that just the approval process that's required with supervisors. So even if you get, someone in whatever department and they spend $200 on supper but provide a receipt, well, it still requires their supervisor approval. And if their supervisor says that's too much money, we won't reimburse you for that much, then there's still a layer of control that exists within there when you require supervisor approval. Supervisor approval. I get when it's the city manager and it goes to the mayor, there's a different threshold of what an appropriate amount is depending on who your guest is. And that's kind of expected.
See, and I think that puts our supervisors in an untenable position, because the policy doesn't specify that, well, if you're a supervisor, you get more, but if you're not, you get less. You're not saying that. I mean, you're saying, well, if you're lower in the organization, we probably shouldn't be spending as much. Is that, am I misreading what you're saying?
Maybe not. Maybe you are. I think even if we specify then that the kind of the range that's in here is what's considered appropriate for what's on the per diems. I don't know. But I think that I think it's generally implied or just understood that one group would say, why would you spend $50? 35 is kind of the going rate. Or you tell them ahead of time? I don't know what the perfect answer to that is.
But I guess so that begs the question, so what direction are we going to provide our staff relative to this policy? Because ultimately it should be pretty transparent, pretty clear. So at the end of the day, I know that, hey, I have a range or whatever it is, so I'm not going to come back and someone's going to say, maybe they had, they drank lemon juice that morning and no, I'm not approving it. Because all this, we provide some discretionary authority based on what I heard for the supervisor to say you spent too much. Or, maybe you could have spent more, or whatever it is, but I guess I want to take away that discretionary piece so that all of a sudden it's not whether I like you, or I know you, or geez, you've been good all along, I'll give you this chance one time only. Those things get in the way and cause trouble.
I agree with the councillor, and I'd like to bring it back, if I can, as the chair, before we get going. You've had some good discussion. I appreciate that. Let's ask you to respect the chair from that, but I'd like to chime in on that very item. If I can, then I'll turn back if you do have a comment, Councillor Thorson. I think that is the question that led to our forensic audits and the question about the gaps in policy. And I am, in my opinion, very firm on that we need to set a policy and we need to set a dollar amount for the staff. And I would hope we would follow that in 99.9% of the cases. That's acceptable. There is that allowance when we do take a minister out or we have a business meeting, that opportunity does exist, but only at, I would hope those would be the off ones, because from the perspective of our taxpayer is paying the bill at the end of the day. We want to ensure, we've had numerous conversations, city manager and I have had about this, that 17 isn't enough for supper, but at the same token, what is enough? And from that perspective, we try to come to a reasonable number. We have been given some information. That's what I'd like to see come out of this, is that it is as cut and dried as possible. I appreciate it. I look at Councillor Baker. When I think about this, policy isn't the cure-all, and he's right, but it's also the same token. If we don't have policy, we're going to get out of the rut or the trail that we should be on, and I believe we're there today. And we come back really hard on our staff and ourselves, I believe, but now we can do that adjustment. At the same token, we still need to stay on the same trail, because if we get out, we're not going to get back in again, and we're going to be bouncing back and forth. Councillor Baker.
Well, Your Worship, May, this last page of the report, the National Joint Council, never heard of this one before, is a forum for public service labor standards. They're often viewed as the standard for public service labor relations, specifically matters related to travel. Well, they've got rates here 1945, 1920, and 4815. If this is legal, is it less or more when you add them up? I'm not sure. But why don't we just pick one of these that supposedly is legal and go with it, if that's the concern?
I think that there's, I appreciate what you're saying, absolutely, and I'd look to the chief financial officer and Councillor Torson because they both have similar job descriptions of being accountants and managing numbers. The question needs to be that if a receipt needs to be presented to make that full claim, or it would be $17 if you don't have a receipt, because we don't want to create ourselves more bookwork from the CFO's perspective that she's got to start issuing T4s, T4As on anyone that travels and has an expense account. I think we need to make sure we cover up both bases. Councilor Torson, I think that's your point, that saying it's got to be, it can be one or the other, but as long as we stay within the laws. Because I want to make sure we follow it from a policy perspective. We need to follow a CRA perspective. That if someone wants to claim, as you say, Councilor Baker, 1945, then they need to either have a receipt for 1945 or they're going to get $17. We just need to make sure, as an example, how we clear that so it's crystal clear to the employees as well as the staff, administration, everyone. So, Councilor.
Yeah, see, and as you're saying that, I guess when I look at 8.3, it says that we're conducting travel for city business members, all members of council and administration. So it makes no reference to city staff.
Administration is all city staff. That's, I think, by the way I read it, and I'll look to
So every single staff member is administration?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and again, so where I was going with that is that is there a need for a separate piece? But the only other piece would be from time to time, senior leadership and council and mayor are often in circumstances where a meeting and whatever it is may incur costs above this. In order to qualify for refund, they must provide blah, 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 whatever to support from them.
And I think
but that what you do is you're putting a fence around it so that overall, you know, do we expect that all of our staff will be meeting with the minister or whomever? Not likely. On the other hand, the people we would expect to do it would probably be your senior leadership and members of council.
And I believe 8.2 addresses that. Is that the intention of 8.2 on that particular piece?
That's correct.
I think that and I'm hearing you, Councillor. Absolutely, we need to. That's where
the part of the one here, it may be in excess of the regular per diems.
Okay, that's well noted. If we wanted to note that, that would be great. Would it be possible? And I'd ask the question of administration as I look at this, to come back with basically no receipts. There's the $17 because that keeps the employee and our finance team out of the woods for taxation receipts, and propose a set of rates similar or slightly higher based on the NJC for the 3 meals with receipts. And it's very cut and dried. So the employee comes back and says, oh, I lost my receipts, you get $17. If I have my receipts, you can claim up to that amount. Would that meet? And I look to the CFO because I'm looking just for some comments here, because we want to keep it simple, yet we want to stay within the policy.
We can go back and research it, see how we can do to keep it so that somebody doesn't flag extra work.
Absolutely, that's the whole intent. It's going to be, I really believe the onus is on the employee, the city councilor, the mayor, administration, whoever's putting in a claim. You're spending money, you want it back, these are the rules you have to follow. It's not much different than CRA when we file our taxes. They lay out, you get a refund if you do this, do that, and you meet the conditions. The conditions are, you are representing the city, you want to ensure that your expenses are covered, but at the same time, for those expenses to be covered, they have to be crystal clear so that we can defend them along the taxpayer. Because I don't think the taxpayer will deny anyone from being able to have their, if they're away from home, it'd be no different than business and other things. We pay our own bills. But from the perspective that when you're on city business, there's expectations that way. But we've got to make sure that it's clear to the staff, it's clear to the administration, and clear to the taxpayer at the end of the day what rules were followed.
So just for clarification, so what's being suggested is 17, 17, 17 remain constant? Or that's the first question. The second one, though, is that if in fact I spend $21.80 for my meal, which includes the 15% gratuity, does the city then have to do anything in terms of that $17 you're talking about?
No, only don't have a receipt, sorry.
Okay,
no problem.
so that's the point. So
yeah, that's where I was headed. Was it's 17 if you don't have a receipt? Option 1. Option 2, if you go to it, you want to present receipts, here's the guidelines that lay it out. And the onus is on the employee, the city, or the person who's representing the city to follow the policy. Councilor.
One other option, if you look at the end, the general of Saskatchewan, they break down their $51 per day in a different way that's maybe more logically. I don't really care to do it because I think it overcomplicates it worse than we already have in a way. I like everything I'm hearing as far as setting a relative limit or an expected limit using some of these ones that are in the table for if you do have a receipt. If you don't have a receipt, $17 per meal. Straightforward, and I don't think it puts too much administrative burden, but it also gives the employee something to reimburse them if they do lose their receipt in one scenario. Anyway, thank you.
It still doesn't address the threshold.
Well, there are rates, sorry.
No further. Councilor Torres.
It's a long day.
Yeah.
Right, absolutely. There are rates on here, that's really what they're saying. These CRA rates that are at the very last page, that's what's acceptable with a receipt. So it's 1945, 1920, 4815, that just sets the threshold of what's considered reasonable for those meals.
So you put that in there as well?
I'll leave it up to administration.
No, but I guess it answers that question about what's the reasonable threshold, right?
So I think.
But I don't think there's anything wrong with putting an inch on it. Because I think what it does do is it fences stuff in. So the sky's not the limit.
I think that's the direction we've sent to administration, and they're going to come back with a little rework.
That's the direction.
We'll look for their direction to see how they propose it to move forward with this. And we'll let you know if you're online or not.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for the discussion, Council. I think this is it, and I appreciate it. No, and the knowledge at this table is important. The discussion is important. I'll try and step in and hold in if we get out of line too badly. But at the end of the day, it's, I want to make sure that we get the comments out in the discussion. That's the important thing.
I was going to say, I think it's important as well for our staff to be, that's the issue with the threshold is this, is that we don't all have capacity or means to spend as much as we want. And if we're sending people to a conference as well, where perhaps they don't have the means, but it's really important for them to be at this particular place, and the cost is more than whatever our allowance would even be prescribed as a CRA ceiling, we put them in a tough spot because we're actually penalizing them. And I struggle with that. And I've seen that where, in my history where people say, I can't afford to go, and they're embarrassed to say that. And so if we value them and want them to go, then we have to find a way around this somehow. I know the rules are there, and this isn't about breaking the rules, but we need to find some other pieces where we need to understand that our employees cannot simply, they just can't write a blank check and pay a little extra. Because right now, we say on one hand, our community's struggling, but here we are, and we're almost nickel and dime to some degree, but we want them to attend because we value their service, and we want to enhance them, and we need to find a way to strike that balance. And I want the guy asking for the ceiling, but by the same token, I recognize that that ceiling may not be enough in particular circumstances as well. So I don't know what the answer is.
Appreciate that, Councillor, and I think you're absolutely right. The policy will likely get 99%. There's that 1% that may fall through the crack. We'll look to administration for some direction on this. I think that there's other communities that must have some of that policy out there to try and address that, but maybe we can cover off that last piece because we've talked about 8.3, I believe it is, where it is, or 8.2, there's allowance on our part. Maybe there's something that we need to look at that as well, and just do a little additional work on that to try and cover that off. But we'll leave it to the administration.
It's just a matter of phoning these guys that are on here, Spruce Grove and whoever else is on it, put Saskatchewan and say, what do you do with this?
Yeah, and absolutely. I think administration will take that back and go from there.
Well, and I think in the last table, there's money that's provided, per day of whatever it is at a conference, so that if you attend that conference, what does it say there? I'm trying to talk about this. Personal, $17.50. So we simply add that $17.50 into these are these extra dollars, and then add somehow that buffer to what your costs are.
And I think that's what the intention is. And I'd like to just remind people that look at that. Those are CRA rates and the NJC rates. I know the federal government's rates are much higher than that. I'm not sure, I haven't dived into the provincial ones, but certainly I know.
They have to create a Phoenix system that generates the paperwork.
Yeah, yeah, the Phoenix system indeed. Representing Phoenix, so. All right, thank you very much for that presentation, Dan. You took a lot of things going on there in that one, and of course, a lively discussion about expenditures. So thank you very much for working with us on that, and we look forward to that next draft. Look to the Director of Communications for inquiries from the media.
Thank you, Your Worship. Today we have a request from the media for yourself, Mayor Alders, as well as Councillor Morrison and Councillor Gash.
I'll look to Council for direction on a recess.
Motion to recess. We have stuff for in camera today?
Councillor seconded. Councillor Morrison. All in favor? Carried.